But if nobody uses your product, it doesn't matter that you stole all the content. And do not quote me.
Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, just did an interview at Stanford, which was so controversial that it was taken down just a few days after it was uploaded. But today I managed to find the video, and what he reveals really is shocking.
The greatest threat to democracy is misinformation, because we're going to get really good at it. The rich get richer, and the poor do the best they can. The situation is quite dire.
Let's dive in.
In the next year, you're going to see very large context windows, agents, and text to action. When they are delivered at scale, it's going to have an impact on the world at a scale that no one understands yet. Much bigger than the horrific impact we've had by social media, right, in my view. The current models take a year to train, roughly 18 months, 6 months of preparation, 6 months of training, 6 months of fine tuning. So they're always out of date. Context window, you can feed what happened. Like you can ask it questions about the Hamas-Israel war, right, in a context. That's very powerful. It becomes current like Google. In the case of agents, I'll give you an example. There's a tool called ChemCrow, C-R-O-W, which was an LLM-based system that learned chemistry. And what they do is they run it to generate chemistry hypotheses about proteins, and then they have a lab which runs the tests overnight, and then it learns. That's a huge accelerant in chemistry, material science, and so forth. So that's an agent model. And I think the text to action can be understood by just having a lot of cheap programmers, right? And I don't think we understand what happens, and this is, again, your area of expertise, what happens when everyone has their own programmer. And I'm not talking about turning on and off the lights. You know, I imagine, another example, for some reason you don't like Google. So you say, build me a Google competitor. Yeah, you personally, you don't build me a Google competitor, search the web, build a UI, make a good copy, add generative AI in an interesting way, do it in 30 seconds, and see if it works, right? So a lot of people believe that the incumbents, including Google, are vulnerable to this kind of an attack. Now, we'll see. So I'll give you an example. The government is in the process of trying to ban TikTok. We'll see if that actually happens. If TikTok is banned, here's what I propose each and every one of you do. Say to your LLM the following. Make me a copy of TikTok, steal all the users, steal all the music, put my preferences in it, produce this program in the next 30 seconds, release it, and in 1 hour, if it's not viral, do something different along the same lines. That's the command. Boom, 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 right? You understand how powerful that is. If you can go from arbitrary language to arbitrary digital command, which is essentially what Python in this scenario is, imagine that each and every human on the planet has their own programmer that actually does what they want, as opposed to the programmers that work for me who don't do what I ask, right? The programmers here know what I'm talking about. So imagine a non-arrogant programmer that actually does what you want, and you don't have to pay all that money to. And there's infinite supply of these programs.
And this is all within the next year or two.
Very soon.
Imagine a world where you have an army of autonomous programmers at your fingertips that can build a copy of Google and TikTok in seconds. Even better is that these artificial programmers will come in infinite supply and be dirt cheap. This not only creates enormous potential, but also a threat to the tech titans of today. What's even crazier is he believes this will be a reality within the next few years.
So in the example that I gave of the TikTok competitor, and by the way, I was not arguing that you should illegally steal everybody's music. What you would do if you're a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, which hopefully all of you will be, is if it took off, then you'd hire a whole bunch of lawyers to go clean the mess up, right? But if nobody uses your product, it doesn't matter that you stole all the content. And do not quote me, right? Right?
You're on camera.
Yeah, that's right. But you see my point. In other words, Silicon Valley will run these tests and clean up the mess. And that's typically how those things are done.
This is particularly controversial because not only is he advocating for the theft of intellectual property and data, but also blatantly admitting that it's common practice in Silicon Valley. They just get away with it by hiring a bunch of lawyers if they get caught. Although Schmidt believes that, these advancements will be transformative. They come at such a steep cost that the United States alone does not have the resources to support it.
And I'm talking to the big companies, and the big companies are telling me that they need 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion.
Stargate is what, 100 billion, right?
They're very, very hard. Sam Altman is a close friend. He believes that it's going to take about 300 billion, maybe more. I pointed out to him that I'd done the calculation on the amount of energy required. And I then, in the spirit of full disclosure, went to the White House on Friday and told them that we need to become best friends with Canada. Because Canada has really nice people, helped invent AI, and lots of hydropower. Because we as a country do not have enough power to do this. The alternative is to have the Arabs fund it. And I like the Arabs personally. I spent lots of time there, right? But they're not going to adhere to our national security rules, whereas Canada and the US are part of a triumvirate where we all agree on.
So these $100 billion, $300 billion data centers, electricity starts becoming the scarce resource.
And by the way, if you follow this line of reasoning, why did I discuss CUDA and NVIDIA? If $300 billion is all going to go to NVIDIA, you know what to do in the stock market. Okay. That's not a stock recommendation. I'm not a licensed.
He said $300 billion with a B may be invested in NVIDIA. That's more than the market cap of AMD. The truth is that these systems are so complex and resource intensive that Schmidt believes only a handful of deep-pocketed players can even play the game of AI dominance.
It's likely that a very small number of companies can play this game. Countries, excuse me. What are those countries, or who are they? Countries with a lot of money and a lot of talent, strong educational systems, and a willingness to win. The US is one of them. China's another one. How many others are there?
Are there any others?
I don't know, maybe. But certainly in your lifetimes, the battle between the US and China for knowledge supremacy is going to be the big fight, right? So the US government banned essentially the NVIDIA chips, although they weren't allowed to say that was what they were doing, but they actually did that into China. They have about a 10-year chip advantage. We have a roughly 10-year chip advantage in terms of sub-DUV, that is sub-5 nanometer.
10 years, that long?
Roughly 10 years.
Wow.
And so you're going to have, so an example would be, today we're a couple of years ahead of China. My guess is we'll get a few more years ahead of China, and the Chinese are whopping mad about this. It's like hugely upset about it.
Schmidt says the only real players in the race for AI domination are the US and China. As for the other countries,
the rich get richer and the poor do the best they can. They'll have to, the fact of the matter is this is a rich country's game, right? Huge capital, lots of technically strong people, strong government support, right? There are two examples. There are lots of other countries that have all sorts of problems. They don't have those resources. They'll have to find a partner.
Later in the interview, when asked about why Google is not leading the AI race, he replied with a candid critique of the work culture at Google, which received a ton of controversy.
I'm no longer a Google employee.
Yes.
In the spirit of full disclosure, Google decided that work-life balance and going home early and working from home was more important than winning. And the reason startups work is because the people work like hell. And I'm sorry to be so blunt, but the fact of the matter is if you all leave the university and go found a company, you're not going to let people work from home and only come in one day a week if you want to compete against the other startups.
When in the early days of Google, Microsoft was like that.
Exactly.
But now it seems to be...
And there's a long history of, in my industry, our industry, I guess, of companies winning in a genuinely creative way and really dominating a space and not making the next transition. It's very well documented. And I think that the truth is founders are special. The founders need to be in charge. The founders are difficult to work with. They push people hard. As much as we can dislike Elon's personal behavior, look at what he gets out of people. Mm-hmm. I had dinner with him and he was flying. I was in Montana. He was flying that night at 10 p.m. to have a meeting at midnight with X.AI, right? Think about it. I was in Taiwan, different country, different culture, and they said that, and this is TSMC, who I'm very impressed with, and they have a rule that the starting PhDs coming out of they're good physicists, work in the factory on the basement floor. Now, can you imagine getting American physicists to do that? With PhDs, highly unlikely. Different work ethic.
Now, these remarks were critiqued as being harsh, so apparently Schmidt requested the video to be removed and later told the Wall Street Journal, "I misspoke about Google and their work hours." But I really think he's being honest here. He expresses that the culture in the US has been corrupted and no longer fosters the work ethic required to dominate. His praise for Elon Musk's ability to get the most out of people and disregard for work-life balance is evidence that he believes only companies that really push their employees to perform will be able to compete. Schmidt goes on to provide insight on why tech leaders need to have a tight grip on employees.
The reason I'm being so harsh about work is that these are systems which have network effects, so time matters a lot. And in most businesses, time doesn't matter that much. Right? You have lots of time. Coke and Pepsi will still be around, and the fight between Coke and Pepsi will continue to go along, and it's all glacial. Done. Right? We're in a period of maximum growth, maximum gain. So, and also it takes crazy ideas. Like when Microsoft did the OpenAI deal, I thought that was the stupidest idea I'd ever heard. Outsourcing essentially your AI leadership to OpenAI and Sam and his team. I mean, that's insane. Nobody would do that at Microsoft or anywhere else. And yet today, they're on their way to being the most valuable company. They're certainly head-to-head in Apple. Apple does not have a good AI solution. And it looks like they made it work.
He touts that while it was crazy of Microsoft to outsource its AI to OpenAI, it allowed Sam Altman and his team to maintain the startup culture needed to blow up without being slowed down by Microsoft's red tape. This partnership is the reason Microsoft was able to secure its position as an AI leader while Apple was left in the dust. Although Schmidt seems like your average tech executive, he's also a licensed arms dealer thanks to his AI military drone project.
Well, let's talk about a real war that's going on. I know that something you've been very involved in is the Ukraine war, and in particular, I don't know how much you can talk about White Stork and your goal of having $500 drones destroy $5 million tanks. So how's that changing warfare?
So I worked for the Secretary of Defense for 7 years and tried to change the way we run our military. I'm not a particularly big fan of the military, but it's very expensive, and I wanted to see if I could be helpful. And the system in America is not going to lead to real innovation. So watching the Russians use tanks to destroy apartment buildings with little old ladies and kids just drove me crazy. So I decided to work on a company with your friend Sebastian Thrun, and as a former faculty member here, and a whole bunch of Stanford people. And the idea basically is to do two things. Use AI in complicated, powerful ways for these essentially robotic war. And the second one is to lower the cost of the robots. Now you sit there and you go, why would a good liberal like me do that? And the answer is that the whole theory of armies is tanks, artillery, and mortar, and we can eliminate all of them. And we can make the penalty for invading a country, at least by land, essentially be impossible. It should eliminate the kind of land battles.
Well, this is a really interesting question, is that does it give more of an advantage to defense versus offense? Can you even make that distinction?
Because I've been doing this for the last year, I've learned a lot about war that I really did not want to know. And one of the things to know about war is that the offense always has the advantage because you can always overwhelm the defensive systems. And so you're better off as a strategy of national defense to have a very strong offense that you can use if you need to. And the systems that I and others are building will do that. Because of the way the system works, I am now a licensed arms dealer. So computer scientist, businessman, arms dealer. And I'm sorry to say.
Is that a progression?
I don't know. I do not recommend this in your career path. I'd stick with AI. And because of the way the laws work, we're doing this privately, and then this is all legal with the support of the governments. It goes straight into the Ukraine, and then they fight the war. And without going into all the details, things are pretty bad. I think if in May or June, if the Russians build up as they are expected to, Ukraine will lose a whole chunk of its territory and will begin the process of losing the whole country. So the situation is quite dire.
Although the ability to destroy critical infrastructure and expensive artillery using cheap FPV drones has already transformed modern warfare, these drones are still vulnerable to signal jamming because they require a remote pilot. However, with the help of AI, these drones can be trained to destroy targets autonomously, essentially creating an army of flying robots. As robotic warfare emerges, so do questions about the future of war and the ethics around killer robots. With AI becoming so powerful, Schmidt is asked about the risk of creating something we do not fully understand and how they intend to prevent it from becoming dangerous.
The analogy I would offer is to teenagers. If you have a teenager, you know they're human, but you can't quite figure out what they're thinking. But somehow we've managed in society to adapt to the presence of teenagers, right? And they eventually grow out of it. And I'm just serious. So it's probably the case that we're going to have knowledge systems that we cannot fully characterize, but we understand their boundaries, right? We understand the limits of what they can do. And that's probably the best outcome we can get.
Do you think we'll understand the limits?
We'll get pretty good at it. The consensus of my group that meets on every week is that eventually the way you'll do this, it's called so-called adversarial AI, is that there will actually be companies that you will hire and pay money to break your AI system.
Like red team.
So it'll be instead of human red teams, which is what they do today, you'll have whole companies and a whole industry of AI systems whose jobs are to break the existing AI systems and find their vulnerabilities, especially the knowledge that they have that we can't figure out. And so, for example, one of the debates that we had for the last year has been, how do you detect danger in a system which has learned it, but you don't know what to ask it? Okay. So in other words, it's a sort of a core problem. It's learned something bad, but it can't tell you what it learned, and you don't know what to ask it. And there's so many threats, right? Like it learned how to mix chemistry in some new way that you don't know how to ask it. And so people are working hard on that. But we ultimately wrote in our memos to them that there was a threshold which we arbitrarily named as 10 to the 26 flops, which technically is a measure of computation, that above that threshold, you had to report to the government that you were doing this. And that's part of the rule. The EU, to just make sure they were different, did it at 10 to the 25.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of close enough. I think all of these distinctions go away because the technology will now, the technical term is called federated training, where basically you can take pieces and union them together. So we may not be able to keep people safe.
Although
from
limits
these
on the complexity of AI models have been put in place, the decentralized training circumvents these limits and creates the potential for artificial intelligence to have dangerous capabilities without us ever knowing. Due to this, there will be a persistent need to test AI models to ensure they don't become too powerful. But what happens if something slips through the cracks? In our interconnected world, a highly advanced AI robot going rogue for just a few minutes can be cataclysmic in ways we can't even imagine right now. Beyond that, Schmidt believes that AI-generated misinformation spreading through social media will become so powerful that it may pose a threat to democracy.
Most of the misinformation in this upcoming election and globally will be on social media. And the social media companies are not organized well enough to police it. If you look at TikTok, for example, there are lots of accusations that TikTok is favoring one kind of misinformation over another. And there are many people who claim without proof that I'm aware of that the Chinese are forcing them to do it. I think we have a mess here. And the country's going to have to learn critical thinking. That may be an impossible challenge for the US. But the fact that somebody told you something does not mean that it's true.
Well, could it go too far the other way, that there's things that really are true and nobody believes anymore? You get, some people call it epistemological crisis, that now, Elon says, no, I never did that. Prove it.
Well, let's use Donald Trump.
Okay.
Look, I think we have a trust problem in our society. Democracies can fail. And I think that the greatest threat to democracy is misinformation, because we're going to get really good at it. When I managed YouTube, the biggest problems we had on YouTube were that people would upload false videos and people would die as a result. And we had a no-death policy. Shocking. And we just went, it was just horrendous to try to address this.
Yeah.
And this is before generative AI. And my conclusion is the CEOs in general are maximizing revenue To maximize revenue, you maximize engagement. To maximize engagement, you maximize outrage. The algorithms choose outrage because that generates more revenue, right? Therefore, there's a bias to favor crazy stuff. And on all sides, I'm not making a partisan statement here. That's a problem. That's got to get addressed.
Although he admits that there is no evidence at the moment, he mentions a potential for countries like China to influence public opinion in the U.S. by spreading misinformation on social media. Unless the country learns critical thinking, we're doomed to be victims of propaganda campaigns. Now, when asked about how advancements in AI will impact the labor market, he says that jobs which require little decision-making will be hardest hit.
I fundamentally believe that the sort of college education, high skills task will be fine because people will work with these systems. I think the systems is no different from any other technology wave. The dangerous jobs and the jobs which require very little human judgment will get replaced.
Although he says it very casually, he's talking about the elimination of tons of jobs and a major transformation in the economy. As business processes become more and more automated, the need for low-skilled workers will continue to decrease and potentially create a gap in the labor market. For those building the next generation of AI-powered products and companies, Schmidt offered some parting advice.
I'm telling you that the ability to prototype quickly really, part of the problem with being an entrepreneur is everything happens faster. Well, now, if you can't get your prototype built in a day using these various tools, you need to think about that, right? Because that's who your competitor is doing. So I guess my biggest advice is when you start thinking about a company, it's fine to write a business plan. In fact, you should ask the computer to write your business plan for you. As long as that's legal.
I should talk about that after you leave.
But I think it's very important to prototype your idea using these tools as quickly as you can, because you can be sure there's another person doing exactly that same thing in another company, in another university, in a place that you've never been.